Hi, I'm Dennis Dempsey. You are listening to the Faith in Humanity podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Faith in Humanity podcast. On this episode, I sat down and talked to Lee and Kathy Baker. Lee and Kathy were involved in the Mormon Church for over 30 years, and Lee was actually a bishop in the Mormon Church, and he wrote about his experiences in the Mormon Church and his discovery of some of the egregious teachings and history of the Mormon faith in his book Mormonism, A Life Under False Pretenses, the true story of a Mormon bishop's journey of discovery. And I'll link that in our show notes and also on our Facebook page. I will also put links in the show notes and on our Facebook page to Lee and Kathy's pages on formormon.org and forwitness.org, as well as a link to Lee's radio program, Mainstream Mormonism. On part one of this two-part series, we discussed the differences between Mormonism and Christianity in doctrine and teaching, as well as the leadership hierarchy and how one rises to power in the Mormon Church. We also go into Lee and Kathy's background, how they got involved with the Mormon Church, and how the Mormon Church's facade began to crumble for them. What was the moment for them that it began to crumble? Now, before we jump into the interview, I just want to address something up front because I've gotten some emails and also some comments in person about this issue. I try my best to be unbiased and I try my best to be open-minded. This podcast is about educating people. It's about my own spiritual self-discovery. It's also about just tearing down misconceptions and stereotypes. So I really don't want to be viewed as someone who's only giving one side of the story. Now, these last stretch of episodes have been focused on cult-like religions, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. And I've gotten some comments that's like, hey, why don't you get someone else from the other side, someone who is actively engaged in the Jehovah's Witnesses or are a Mormon, and sit down and talk with them so you get a different side. You get the positive outlook of these belief systems, and you're able to see how they can be beneficial and how people do benefit from them and how maybe they're not as dangerous as you're presenting them to be. And I understand all that, and I just want to say that I have reached out to people. I've reached out to multiple people to be on the podcast, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and either I don't get a response, or when I do get a response, they just direct me to their website, or they give me a pamphlet of information, and that's it. It seems as though they do not want to have a communication with me. They don't want to have a dialogue. So sitting down with people in these religious belief systems is incredibly difficult. I found it incredibly difficult to find anybody in Scientology to talk with me. And I eventually found Andy, who is an independent Scientologist in Australia. So I guess the fact that he was an independent Scientologist or practicing Scientology independently from the Church of Scientology, that he was allowed to sit down and speak with me. His episode was episode 6, if you haven't listened to it. But I try my best to be unbiased. I try my best to find a vast range of guests to get all different angles of every single story. So I hear you and I understand. Now, if you know someone who's a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, or maybe you yourself are a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, well, then get in contact with me. I'd love to sit down and speak with you. You can reach me at tfih.podcast@gmail.com. All right. Please enjoy part one of this two-part interview. Well, Lee and Kathy, thank you so much for sitting down and speaking with me. To start off, I just want you to give the audience a brief overview of some of the core beliefs of Mormonism. What does it mean to be a Mormon, and how is it different from Christianity? And also, if you could, maybe just give the basic internal structure of Mormonism, the hierarchy of the leadership and how they rise to power, because I was very unfamiliar with the beliefs of Mormonism, and I was unfamiliar with the structure of Mormonism. Reading through your book, having that base and that foundation really helped me to understand the rest of the points that you were making in your book, and I think it will help the audience understand our discussion a lot more if they just have that foundation.
Okay, good. No problem at all. As a kind of historical background, classic Mormonism began in 1830 with the organization of the Mormon Church, even though it had, as it matured, it actually had 4 different names, and it ended up with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, in 1830, the Book of Mormon was published, and that was the formal organization of the church on April 6th. But the story of Mormonism after the beginning of Mormonism kind of went backwards a little bit into time into 1820, when Joseph Smith claimed that he had a vision when he was 14 years old in a grove of trees in upstate New York, and he saw God and Jesus, which told him to restore the Church of Christ. And that's the foundational belief of Mormonism, is that they are restoring, at the direction of God, Christ Church to include not only its organizations, but the policies, procedures, ceremonies, authority that they believe had been taken from the earth or corrupted by men. So the foundation of Mormonism goes back to 1830, and in American history, this is a period of time, religiously speaking, that's called the burnt over period. And in the New England area, there was a great kind of fervor and revival of religious thought, religious practices, formation of a lot of very uniquely American religions, and the one that actually stands head and shoulders above all the rest is Mormonism, relative to being uniquely American. So many of the other churches were different morphs or changes of versions of Christianity, but Mormonism is unique in that it's a young American man the young boy who has a vision, and this actually speaks to a lot of the Europeans, a lot of the Africans, a lot of the Asians, in that it's a unique religion and not a takeoff, not a break-off from an earlier version of Catholicism or revisioning versions of the earlier churches. It's uniquely American, and for some reason that has some authority, some pizzazz to the selling of Mormonism. So that's the beginning of Mormonism. Now their structure, and again, I should say in the beginning, Dennis, a lot of the things, and we've been asked this several times, when we now speak about Mormonism, after we've been out of the church for nearly 9 years, people, very intelligent, very honest people, will say, well, Lee, if you knew all this, could you speak as a semi-authority on Mormonism? You know the details of Mormonism, you know their doctrine, their scriptures, their history, their policies and procedures. Why did you not see this before? And it's really key for your audience or anyone reviewing Mormonism to consider the fact that as you research, you gain information, you gain knowledge, and you gain application. So it may sound like, and I believe we do know Mormonism quite well now, but in the beginning, as with anything else, American history, European history, family history, you don't have all the information or all the facts at your earlier stages. So we did not have the depth of knowledge or the depth of processing that we have now that we did then. So to go back to your basic question, what are the core elements of Mormonism that makes it different than other religions? The actual foundation, and any Mormon will tell you this, is that it is a restoration of Christ's church and authority. Now, that separates it from so many other Christian religions, because Mormonism stands at the top and says, we appreciate what all the other churches have done, all the other religions, all the other prophets, priests, and good people, but they've gotten so much wrong and so much has been corrupted, it's now time to go back and restart Christianity. In fact, Mormonism teaches that it has been restarted 3 times. Once in Jerusalem with Christ himself, once in America with the people of the Book of Mormon, the Nephites and the Lamanites, and that failed. And the 3rd time is with Joseph Smith. So a foundational pillar of Mormonism is that God started his church and it failed twice, and the 3rd restart is with Joseph Smith. So the Bible, they believe, is corrupted. They believe that it is untrustworthy, and because of that, a new prophet, a new set of scriptures were needed to begin Mormonism. Now, the core theological teachings, those are the historical pillars. The core theological pillars of Mormonism makes it unique, is completely unique, I would say wrong and unbiblical, and that is that God was once a man and that men can become gods. So the separation between classic Christianity, biblical Christianity, and Mormonism is that they believe that this is part of a process. There are billions and billions of gods, and we have been assigned or born from a set of godly parents who inherited this world as part of their progression as they move forward, and a way to teach us how to move forward and become gods and goddesses of our own worlds and move forward. So there's no single God in Mormonism. They do honor and respect the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, as that God that is in his progression. But they do not recognize that God is either eternal or all-powerful, that he is progression. So that's a short recap of the differences of Mormonism. And I don't know if Kathy wanted to say anything as well.
Sure. Yeah, I had written down a few things that Lee had just mentioned, and definitely that Mormonism thinks it's a restoration, when it just amazed Lee and I that for years we always thought that the temple was a restoration, because Mormons really believe in temple marriage and going to the temple. And we've been to Israel twice now, and there is nothing in the Mormon temple that even resembles what the biblical temple looked like. The Mormons take that way, way too far, saying that it's a restoration of what Christ set up on the earth, or what was in Old Testament times even. And only the high priest could go into the temple. I mean, this could be a whole other discussion, so I won't go into detail about it. But I did want to say that even in the book of Matthew, chapter 22 in the Bible, that some Pharisees come up and they ask Jesus. They're asking, well, okay, let's say that this woman is married to this man, and then her husband dies, and then she remarries his brother, and then he dies, and then she remarries his brother, and and it goes on and on. So she's married to all these different men. Then they ask Jesus, who will she be with in the resurrection? Because I want to know. And Jesus tells them, he says, you are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like angels in heaven. So right there from Jesus' mouth, he is telling them that they're not going to be married in heaven. And that was a hard concept for me coming out of Mormonism after 50 years, to think that I wouldn't be married to Lee. But now my comfort is I know that I will be with Lee in heaven, but Christ says you're not going to be married in heaven. But yet a big focus on Mormonism is the temple and temple marriage. So that was a big difference between Christianity and Mormonism. And another thing that the Mormons, I think, really that they just really take the Bible. They don't trust the Bible. Their 8th article of faith says, we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as long as it is translated correctly. For years, they have told members of the Mormon Church that the Bible is in error, that it was not translated correctly, so you can't trust the Bible. So that way, they trust the Book of Mormon more than the Bible. And that way they can just kind of cherry pick the Bible and not really get its meaning and understanding. Now that Lee and I have become Christian, come out of Mormonism, we can really know that anything that people say about a religion, you need to verify it through the Word of God, which is the Bible. And if it doesn't line up with what's in the Bible, it's not of God. And so that's a huge difference right there. And one other core thing that they do baptisms for the dead. And I can let Lee mention anything on that if you want. But baptisms for the dead, because they believe that all the people that lived on the earth before Christ who weren't baptized, that they need to baptize them, and so that they have a chance for salvation. But within Scripture, Jesus even, he says, follow me, and so to be baptized, but he never connects baptism to salvation. So salvation is not, baptism is not a requirement for salvation. The requirement for salvation is very clear over and over throughout the New Testament, but I'll just read one scripture. It's Romans 10, verses 9 through 10, says, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. And within Mormonism, they believe that you have to work your way to get to heaven. Grace, they do not. Nowadays, they'll say, yes, we believe in grace. But within their Book of Mormon, it says that we believe that we are saved by grace after all we can do. So they believe that you have to work. You've got to get that temple recommend. You've got to hold the priesthood. You've got to work your way in order to have salvation. So as a Mormon, I never knew if I was truly saved and that if I was really going to be with God after this life. Where now as a Christian, I know that through my belief, that God gives, the gift of grace through belief, and that if you believe that, then you are saved. It doesn't mean you can go out and do everything wrong in the book, but anyway, I'll get you back. I'm off subject. So I'll turn you back over to Lee for your next question. Those are pretty much some of the basics that stood out to us, the core of Mormonism, and then I threw in some of the things within Christianity that are different.
Did we cover that, or should we expand?
No, that was wonderful. Just can you just give a brief overview of the internal structure and the leadership of Mormonism? Because a lot of our discussion will be surrounding issues with the leadership, and I think it's important for the audience to know how the leadership works and everything, and why it's so dangerous.
Okay, absolutely. There are elements of the structure within the leadership of Mormonism that try to mirror image the biblical structure of Christ Church. And they kind of play both sides of the fence, where they say some things are a restoration of the earlier church. To give you a classic example of that, the Mormons have 12 apostles. Christ had 12 apostles. Now, the Mormons use that to say, see, we are, in fact, restoring the organization of the church because of the 12 apostles. Now, if there's no biblical understanding, and that's key to 99% of the discussion today, is that I really believe, Dennis, that if I could meet someone who's interested in the life after life, or the Bible, or following Christ, and they had no biblical background like I had when I was younger, you can sell Mormonism based on what I would call the kindergarten version of the scriptures without being in depth. Because you could say, look, here's a picture of Jesus Christ and his 12 apostles, and here's a picture of 12 apostles in Salt Lake City that reflect the restoration of the 12 apostles. Now, if you go a little bit deeper as an adult and say, well, what were the qualifications, what were the requirements, what were the activities of those apostles, you would see that there is no connection between the two. The earlier 12 apostles were all eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ and had a unique ministry, and they were not replaced by other people along the way. Now, it is true that when Judas Iscariot betrayed Christ, he was replaced by Matthias, but Matthias, was one of the 70, it says, one of those who had been with us since the beginning. So it was a position of authority from someone who had been an eyewitness of Jesus Christ. So the 12 apostles were not replaced in the 1st century, the 2nd century, and on into the 5th century. You know, even when the church you might say, was kind of protected by the Roman Emperor under Constantine I, and it became the church was protected by the state of Rome. No one even thought to go back to the original structure of the 12 apostles because those men had a unique mission, a unique time, and they had passed on. The Mormon Church kind of revived that, I believe, as just a structure, and it is based on seniority. Absolutely amazing, and even as a Mormon, I felt a little awkward that from the general authorities and these 12, it's the seniority. If you live long enough, if you are, say, out of the 12 apostles, if you are apostle number 7, and you live long enough and the ones ahead of you die off, you will become the prophet, the leader, the president of the Mormon Church. That is totally unbiblical. So if everybody dies in the right order in the Mormon Church hierarchy within their structure, you can look at the general authorities and you can look at the 12 apostles and you can pick the next 7 prophets of the church just based on age. And that is absolutely, I believe, unbiblical. So the hierarchy of the church is done like this. They have what's called the First Presidency. The First Presidency, and it's unique, it's strange. Now, as a Mormon, we get used to this phrase, but hopefully your audience will kind of cringe a little bit at the idea of the president of the church, but that is what he's called. Technically, he is a prophet, but because of the corporation of the church is a corporation more than anything else. It's a massive corporation, and the money, and in my opinion, the fraud and the waste and the abuse and the authority and the power exercised by that corporation is immense. But the leader of that corporation is called the president of the corporation of the First Presidency, and he also holds the title as the prophet of the church. But to keep it, which I think it should be done, keep it within the corporation side, the president of the church is the senior member of those 12 apostles, and he becomes the president of the church, sometimes called the prophet of the church, and he has 2 counselors. So the presidency, the very highest organization within the church, are 3 people, 3 men. It is the president of the church and 2 counselors, a first counselor and a second counselor. Directly below them are the 12 apostles, from which they then graduate to become the prophet of the church. Beneath the 12 apostles is a collection of about 80 general authorities, and they're broken up into different regional areas around the world. It used to be just around the United States, and now it's around the world, where they are responsible for areas and stakes, and stake is the higher organization within a congregation. So let's pick a theoretical area in Salt Lake City or in Alabama. It doesn't make any difference. A congregation is 200 to 300 people, and that congregation is called a ward. And if you put generally 6 to 8 of those wards together, that's called a stake. And that stake then reports to an area authority. That area authority will be one of those general authorities that I spoke about 80 of them. And then that area authority responds directly to one of the 12 apostles. The 12 apostles then report to the First Presidency of the church. It is very hierarchical structure, even within the smaller congregation. I was a bishop of one of them congregations, a ward, and I had people in my organization that reported to me. I reported to the stake president. The stake president then reported on up to the general authority. So the hierarchy of the church is very structured and very controlled, but in my opinion, it does not reflect the organization of the original church. Whether people believe it or not, the Apostle Paul went around and he organized churches, and those churches were usually given the names of the cities they were in. The Laodicea or Corinth or Philippi, but in the Mormon Church, the wards sometimes have the name of the town that they're in, and sometimes they're just given a number. The 5th ward of Salt Lake, the 9th ward of Arvada, the 2nd ward of Denver, the 27th ward of Atlanta. very structured, and the boundaries, here's something unique to Mormonism, the boundaries of those areas, that ward, that congregation, is flexible when the stake organization changes it, but you as a member, if you live on 5th and Vine, and across the street is your sister, and your sister's family goes to one congregation because the street you're on, let's say 5th Avenue, is the dividing line between the two congregations, you go to one church, she goes to the other church. And if you violate those boundaries, you cannot hold a position. You should not attend the church. You should not take the sacrament. You cannot participate in that congregational activities, and you are generally counseled to stay within your own boundaries. Now, those boundaries can change. It's kind of like a voting boundary when people gerrymander in the United States to get all the Republicans in one area, all the Democrats in another. Because of size or congregational growth, the church will change the boundaries. But those boundaries are very serious, and when a missionary meets someone who is investigating the church, the second question they will ask, first question will be, what is your name? The second question is, where do you live? Because in his mind, he is going to pigeonhole you into the missionaries that cover that area. So if you're at a bus stop in downtown Duluth, and they say, hey, Bob, we would like to talk to you about the church. Where do you live? The missionaries are thinking, oh, those are the missionaries in this area or that area. They'll have a short conversation with you, and then they will turn you over to the people who are within that structure. So now that we're out of Mormonism, it is a very clinically run organization, very authoritative in its structure, in its demeanor, and also in its processes. So that's the general structure of the Mormon Church. And then within the small congregation, there's a bishop. He has 2 counselors, which mirror image all the presidencies above him. Again, the bishop has 2 counselors. The next level above that is the stake president. He has 2 counselors. Above that is the area presidency. He has 2 counselors. Above that is the general authorities. They have counselors. And then above that is the First Presidency of the church. They have 2 counselors as well. So the organization structure and administration of the Mormon Church is very organized. But I do not believe that it reflects any restoration of any biblical organization at all. Certainly not in the early years. The biblical organization in the church clearly states that polygamy it was not approved, and that a bishop should be married to one woman. And in the early years of the Mormon Church, bishops were almost required to have more than one wife. So there's a flexibility within Mormonism depending on the political structure of the time and the social needs of the people. In fact, I have often called Mormonism the chameleon of Christianity, because they will adapt and change, and this is historically proven even within Mormonism, and they will say, well, that, yes, we have changed a lot, but that was under the direction of the prophet. The prophet said we should change relative to polygamy or training or views against the United States or the nature and character of Joseph Smith. Many teachings and policies of the Mormon Church have changed radically over the year, over the many years. About 186 years the church has been alive, and most of that, I believe, has been through political pressure. There are 5 federal laws directed specifically against the Mormon Church relative to bigamy, polygamy, and philandry. So, in the short answer, that's the structure of the Mormon Church. I believe it to be very clinical, and it responds to its people that way because of its unique structure and its overbearing reporting mechanisms. Very similar to another church that is generally not considered Christian, that would be the Jehovah's Witness Church. It's the reporting authority and kind of spying on your neighbor philosophy that makes it very clinical and cold.
How did you both get involved in Mormonism? What was so appealing to the Mormon faith for the both of you?
Okay, we'll start with Kathy because she was the Mormon first.
That's true. My parents, when I was 4 years old, my aunt and uncle actually had joined the Mormon Church, and my grandfather had passed away. And so my mom wanted her father to be buried in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church would not bury my grandfather because he had divorced my grandmother, so they would not bury him. So my aunt said, oh, well, the Mormon Church will bury him. And so then my parents started, and they did bury him. They allowed them to have the service at the Mormon Church. So my parents started becoming interested in the Mormon Church, and they joined the church when I was 4 years old. I'm almost 60 now, so that was many years ago. And so I believed in the Mormon Church wholeheartedly because I was raised in it. I was baptized at age 8. And I went through the Young Women program, went through seminary, which is a study of each book of Scripture within the Mormon, 4 different books of Scripture in 4 years of high school. And I just believed wholeheartedly in it. And I'm the one that brought Lee into it when we were dating. He actually... a little side story told his best friend, he saw me on the school bus in junior high, and he said, I'm going to marry that girl someday. And we had not even met. So then we met about a year or two later, and we started dating. And so I told him, I said, I will not marry unless you're Mormon. I won't marry outside the Mormon Church. So then Lee started taking the missionary discussions, and we broke up for a while because he said, I can't become Mormon. But then we got back together, and I went to the Catholic priest with him to learn Catholicism, and he came to the Mormon Church with me to learn Mormonism. And then finally, he converted to Mormonism. I'll let you tell his side of the story.
Oh, she's absolutely accurate. It was a classic love story, love at first sight. When I first saw her, she was 14 years old, and I just know. And that foundation, that strength between us, would prove to be our strength in the future when we did battle our way out of Mormonism. Our love for each other and our love for the Bible and for Christ always grew stronger. So I went through 2.5 years of what is called investigating the Mormon Church. Now, I was 19 years old and 20 years old during this period of time, so I went through about 20 pairs of missionaries in different states as we moved. I had joined the military, so I was an Army intelligence analyst, and I went to the language school in Monterey, learned Russian, then went down to Texas and learned my analytical trade and became a counterterrorism instructor and so on. So we did move a lot, but I kept with the investigation process of Mormonism, and I really believed that what I was asking and what I was learning was valid, and I did convert to Mormonism for what I believe to be valid reasons. Again, hearkening back to what I said earlier, if you have no biblical foundation, I could right now pretty much convince almost anybody to join Mormonism, because on the surface it makes sense. It's family-oriented. It purports to be a restoration of God's authority, Jesus' church, and the new set of scriptures clarify and correct what was corrupted by men. So without much knowledge, it sounds great. And I liken it to the knowledge, expertise, and application of many different disciplines. You know, if you have a limited information on science or on the cosmos, then you can hear bits and pieces of a story, and you might not know exactly what a supernova is, but if you are told, well, this is what's going to happen, and you expand your knowledge to a certain point, well, then you change your opinion. If you don't know what the process and procedures of microorganisms or theoretical biology, then there are things that will change in your life as you are educated down that path. It's kind of like the process of gluons and quarks and the process of light structure. If you don't know about those things, then there's a whole kind of there's another world that you can't have an opinion on if you don't know what those are and how they affect. And it's the same thing with religion. So I was exposed to things that were new to me because I was an average or below average Catholic, so I did not have much knowledge or background or history in the Bible. So again, a long period of time researching Mormonism. I converted to Mormonism primarily because of Kathy. We did get married outside the Mormon Church, and then I was baptized later after our marriage, and that became somewhat of a badge of courage within Mormonism because Kathy was presented as a young woman who could convert a young man into Mormonism, and then we both became very active. So absolutely with our consent, we were presented as the all-American success story because here's a faithful young woman in Mormonism who kind of went out of the church, which is a dangerous thing to do, and successfully converted a young man, brought him in, and became active. So that gave hope and courage and an example to some of the young women or families in that area. So I joined the church and jumped in with both feet and became very, very active.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that it took Lee 2.5 years of investigating Mormonism. It was not just an overnight process, and he went through 17 pairs of missionaries. But when he told me, he came out, my parents sent me up to Rick's College to get me away from Lee so that it was a Mormon college. It's now BYU, Idaho. And so they sent me up there hoping that I would find a nice Mormon boy or that I would stop thinking about Lee. Well, Lee came up on Valentine's Day and proposed to me. So
well, I'm guessing he didn't ask your parents for approval before that, I guess.
Well, he did take them out for a steak dinner, and I guess he had asked them, and my mom said, do you know that we can pray you out of Kathy's life? So then he was just kind of like, I don't care, I'm going to ask Kathy. Yeah. So, but when he came up to propose to me, he said, you know what, Kathy, he was taking the missionary discussions while I was up at college. So he's in Colorado, I'm up in Idaho. And he said, I know that I'm going to join the Mormon Church. I know that it's true. But he said, and my parents told me that I called them up to let them know that Lee had proposed. And I graduated at 16 from high school because, anyways, I had year-round school the last year, and I just combined my junior and senior year together. And so I was up at college, and now I'm 17. And so when I called my parents to tell them that I'm engaged, my mom said, well, we're not going to let you get married until you're 18. You're not of age. And so he proposed to me in February. I was going to be 18 in October. I said, okay, fine, I'll get married on my birthday. So anyway, they did consent. We were married July 10th, 1976.
What is your birthday?
It wasn't my birthday. My birthday was in October, so my parents consented and let us get married.
Lee would only have had to remember one date if you got married on your birthday. He wouldn't have to remember.
No. I know. I should have waited, right? Now 4 kids and 10 grandkids later, he has way too many to remember. Yeah. So anyway, that was interesting. But Lee told me, he said, I'm not going to join the church for your parents. He said, I'm joining the church for me, and if I get baptized before we get married, he goes, it means I'm joining the church for your parents, essentially. And he said, I know I want to get baptized, but I'm not going to do it for your parents. Mm-hmm. So he did get baptized after we were married a couple of months. So.
And Dennis, let me just explain to your audience, the reason we provide that level of detail is because some Mormons who hear our story or read our book or listen to the radio program or even this broadcast, they may try to dismiss us as a couple who never were really committed Mormons. And a lot of people feel really good about that if they can convince themselves, but that's absolutely not true. And that's why we have very few people who either challenge us or to have a discussion with us or look into our history. That's why we are an open book. We put everything possible into the book that we've printed, and we take all and any questions. Cannot offend Lee or Kathy Baker, just to kind of set the tone that we were not part-time Mormons or uneducated Mormons or not completely devout Mormons or did not know the details of Mormonism. It's very hard to rise to the rank of a Mormon bishop and literally attend thousands of Mormon ceremonies within the temple, and there's not a ritual or a ceremony or a position, generally speaking, that we've not held. So the reason we give that level of detail is kind of remove the possibility that, oh, well, these weren't really active Mormons or knowledgeable Mormons or in the inner circle. So we were definitely committed to the Mormon Church. And we were not educated, but we were certainly committed.
Yeah, and you said that you did 2 years of research before converting to Mormonism, and you went through 17 different missionaries. But one of the reasons that you started leaving the church, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, but it was you started to be exposed more and more to more information about the Mormon Church. So when you converted, was it just that the times were different and you just didn't have access to that information at the time when you converted?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we've spoken several times to college students and millennials nowadays, and it really is awesome to watch the twinkle in a person's eyes, even someone as young as you, and try to explain to them the world of 1974, 75, and 76, where there was no information age, there was no internet, there was no resource or collection or repository for information, no matter what you wanted to learn about. If you wanted to learn about mining or space travel or woodworking or Mormonism or Buddhism, you either go to a Mormon or you go to the library, and whatever was printed is what you were limited to. Now, the Mormon Church nowadays says all this information was available. Well, it was available in the Library of Mormonism within Salt Lake City if you get permission to go in and study, but obviously when there is no personal computers, there is no internet, to describe that world to people today, especially the younger generation of today, it is nearly impossible to explain what it was like to research information, especially the quality of the information. Now, I could get all kinds of information on Mormonism from the Mormons, but as would be proven true 25 years later, that information was not only cleaned up, skewed, and presented in a particular way, it was a very thin slice of Mormonism. To give you an example, when I was doing that 2.5 years of research that you're asking about, I was intrigued by what is called within Mormonism the first vision of Joseph Smith. Now, the first vision of Joseph Smith happened in 1820 when he was reportedly 14 years old, and he went in and he prayed, and he was sincere, and he had just read a passage from the book of James, and he was confused on what church to join. And it's really a touching story, and it makes a great movie, and it makes great dioramas, great pictures. So this 14-year-old boy in upstate New York goes out into the woods, very sincere, very honest, kneels down, prays God and Jesus Christ, show up and say, hey, thank you for asking. The church has been corrupted. We'd like you to kind of restart it. And it's an awesome story. But that is what Mormonism presented in the year 1974 and 75. Now, later on, you can read from the Mormon History Church themselves online, on your phone, while you're riding the bus to work. The Mormon Church now says, well, actually, there are 9 versions of that first vision, and none of them agree with each other. In other words, Joseph Smith never told anyone from that first vision. Something that just struck me as an honest story. Now Mormonism says, well, he never told anybody about that until 12 years after the event. This is, in fact, the pivotal event in Mormonism. Even the Mormon Church, within their massive congregational meetings called the General Conference, when they get together. Many Mormon prophets have said, if that never happened, then this church is a farce. So that really spoke to me, Lee Baker, in 1974, 1975. Now, come to find out that Joseph Smith himself did not write that story, did not tell that story to anyone. This is now information from the Mormon Church 25, 30, 40 years later, where they say, yes, Joseph Smith did not have the fortitude to tell anybody that story. Now, think of that. Dennis, really, think of that. When Joseph Smith was 14 years old, he has a vision from God, and he doesn't tell anybody for 12 years. This is now not Lee Baker's information. The Mormon Church acknowledges and tells people today that he did not tell anybody for 12 years. Well, that speaks of a little deception, because in my youth, they said that he got excited, he jumped over the fence, he ran home, he told mom and dad, and he told all the preachers, hey, God is coming back and he's going to reset the correction of his churches. And Joseph Smith says, I was persecuted for telling that story. Well, it has a different ring to it now in my older years, when I find out that he didn't tell anybody for 12 years, and he told different versions of it. First off, it was just angels came and visited him. Then it was just God that visited him. Then it was God and Jesus and some angels. And they corrected him on what he was doing wrong. In the first couple of iterations of this story, he was not told to restart a church. He was told to repent from his own wrongdoing. Now, this is official Mormon doctrine that is foundational in that, what I was describing earlier, the chameleon of Christianity, the story of Mormonism changes. But in 1975, 1974, 1976, that was what was available. That was the single version. And this is why, both publicly, on the radio and in person, Kathy and I have said, we have been lied to by the Mormon Church, but no generation now can say the Mormons have lied to us, because Mormonism is now trying to be more honest about their past lies. So the information that is available today will tell an investigator. So if we are describing my investigation of 2.5 years, 17 pairs of missionaries, and the information that was available back then, you can't do that now. The Mormon Church has legally cushioned themselves by putting this stuff out there on the website. They don't promote it, but it is there, and it is printed, and it has the authority of the Mormon Church. So anyone investigating Mormonism now would see an entirely different picture than what I saw. So the Mormon Church right now is on my side. That's what's really strange when we talk to Mormons, and they say, well, I've never heard of that. I don't believe that. I didn't see that. I didn't read that. And I would say, well, then your homework has not been done, but the Mormon Church is on my side. When Lee and Kathy Baker say there are 9 versions of the first vision, and it has been a deceptive process, they say, well, that's your opinion. And I say, no. That is what is on the Mormon Church website. The story has changed, the vault has been opened, and the truth about the past lies are now available. So, simply put, and I'll turn some time over to Kathy, that no human being on the planet today can make the claim that the Mormon Church has lied to them about their past, because it is now out there, just like the history of America, the history of slavery, the history of the Civil War. Whatever you want to research, generally speaking, you can get more than one opinion. And it was very much limited back in our time.
And where you can find the information is at LDS.org. It's at LDS.org under the Gospel Topics Essays. And so if you go to LDS.org, the Mormon website, Gospel Topics Essays, then they'll bring up a list. But unfortunately, they don't bring up all of the essays. There's a couple on polygamy that they do not include. They're rather difficult to find. You have to kind of search for it. You have to know the whole title of it. But those ones that you can't find easily on polygamy, those ones, it's polygamy and the church and Kirtland in Ohio, I think, is the one that is tough to find. But within that one, it tells that the church says that Joseph Smith may have had up to 40 wives. And they tell you that within the footnotes. The interesting thing to me, Dennis, is that Lee in his book says, you don't know what you don't know. He has a whole chapter devoted to that. And you don't know what you don't know. So back in 1976, we did not know this information. We were blinded. And pretty much the Mormon Church keeps you indoctrinated with only what they want you to know. So all these things that Christians know and that we know today, we did not know as Mormons because they would tell us, oh, don't look into this or that because that's Satan and Satan will overtake you. Well, now you can go to LDS.org and you can look up and you can read about the first vision and the 9 different versions that Joseph Smith had. But yeah, we ask members when we go to Utah and we're witnessing to people on the street, and we'll tell them, Lee has a notebook with all of the gospel topics essays printed off from LDS.org so they can see it came directly from that website. And we'll say, what do you think about this? Yeah, have you read? What do you think of the gospel topics essays? And they're like, oh, we've heard about them, but I don't feel the need to research them. I know everything there is to know in Mormonism. And if we read a portion of it to them where Joseph Smith had up to 40 wives, they're like, oh, that doesn't bother me. But the Mormon Church indoctrinates you. And we read a book a few years back on mind control by Stephen Hassan. And it's very interesting how the Mormon Church, they don't talk about the Mormon Church specifically. They don't talk about them at all, but they're talking about cults and how they can use mind control and indoctrination. I never had walked into a Christian bookstore before. I had only gone to the Mormon bookstore because we were told to buy our books from the Mormon bookstore. So we were only getting the Mormon side of the story. When we would have lessons in church, it would only be on what they wanted us to hear. So in Jacob chapter 2, where it talks about polygamy within the Mormon Book of Mormon, when we had a lesson on that, the instructor actually stood up in front of the class and said, okay, today we are not going to get into any discussion on polygamy. It has made it very clear that we are not going to discuss polygamy because that's controversial within this class. But that was the question everybody had was, well, and now the church has come out with these essays and you can read it, but people are not going online to read it. Active Mormons aren't.
So if you had access to the information today that you did back then, you probably wouldn't have converted to Mormonism, right?
Oh, not a chance. Not a chance at all. Yeah.
So do you think there is like an expiration date on Mormonism as a religion as information becomes more easily attainable?
In the numbers they report, Dennis, yes. They're having a real struggle right now with their youth and to keep them into the church and keep them kind of ignorant. But this is the first time in the history, the 186-year history of the Mormon Church, where they actually are decreasing in membership. What's called when they have enough babies and they self-generate, they can't keep up with they need the converts. So in the past, in its height, Mormonism reported 15 million members. Now, as a Mormon bishop and part of the administration of the church, I can guarantee you, like any Mormon knows, that you have to actually go through a process to get your name removed. So it's not quite like any other church or organization. If you're baptized as a Mormon, unless you take active procedures to get out of the church, you're going to be counted forever. So the number of active Mormons, or just Mormons, period, has always been skewed. There's probably less than 5 million active Mormons. They may report a membership of 15 million, but those are people who fell away. The Mormon Church has historically a problem with retention. in South America, and as we work closely with Africa, excuse me, the Mormons have a great success in initial conversion, but most people, about 80% of the Mormon Church, leave or become inactive within a year. But they do not come out of the rolls or the reporting procedure of the Mormon Church, so it still looks like they have quite a bit. So to focus on an answer to your question, I do believe that the Mormon Church will decrease significantly, but I never I don't believe that they will ever go away. There are 5 million people, Dennis, who believe that the earth is flat. There will always be a collection of people in the Mormon Church for family reasons, for political reasons, or for financial reasons. I have met Mormons who know Mormonism is not true, but for the social hook, for the family hook, for the financial hook, they do not leave Mormonism. So Mormonism is not a church where the active membership reflects the commitment to the theological beliefs of that church. Mormonism is unique in that, because Kathy mentioned earlier, the mind control, the historical control of the family is reflected in the general membership. And when I first started considering leaving Mormonism, I actually went to a psychologist and said, how do I deal with this? And she looked at me and she said, well, you simply find another church. And it hit me there that the control Mormonism had over my life wasn't just, and it wasn't even primarily theological. It was my family. If I left Mormonism, I risked a divorce. I risked losing my children, my grandchildren, never going to another family activity. And the shunning activity within Mormonism is extremely strong. Even today, we have members in our own family, children and grandchildren, that we cannot speak to because we have left Mormonism. So the idea of leaving Mormonism reflects in its inability to completely disappear. Because people, whether they believe in the Mormon doctrine or not, that's not the primary motivating factor for people to remain Mormon. Very good question, Dennis. But let me answer what's hidden underneath the core question you asked. Will Mormonism ever disappear? And the answer is no, because very few Mormons will leave Mormonism because of Mormon issues. They will stay Mormon because of family ties. So as a cult, Mormonism has an absolutely amazing business model, if you want to call it that. Because when we ask Mormons, do you believe in Joseph Smith? Do you believe in the Book of Mormon? Do you believe in the doctrine of Mormonism? They will answer as if I just asked, would you leave your family for Mormonism? Would you leave your job for Mormonism? Would you leave your wife? So they translate immediately, just like I did. When I was challenged about the inconsistencies of Mormonism, I did not hear the question that was asked of me. I heard, will you risk your family? So I was challenged on the nature and character of Joseph Smith, but within the Mormon mind, it is immediately translated into, would you risk your family for answering this question? And the answer is no. So, very good question. The answer is a little bit more complicated because the Mormon does not hear what you ask. You may ask a Mormon, do you believe it was right for Joseph Smith to take the wives of other men and keep it secret? Now, every woman in America, a lot of Mormons, women that we've spoke to, you can see in their face, ooh, that it's a disgusting activity to take another man's wife and then lie to your other wives and lie to that woman's husband. Of course they find that repulsive. Of course they find that wrong. But what I am actually asking is, will you leave Mormonism for that disgust? And the answer is no. So I may ask about the nature and character of Joseph Smith, but the question they hear is, will you leave your wife? Because if you follow, or your husband or your family, if you follow the logical consequences of following a person like Joseph Smith, you will leave your faith. And leaving your faith means losing your family. So a very intelligent man or woman. I have spoken to, Dennis, professors at BYU, men who can split atoms, men who teach high theoretical mathematics, very intelligent men. I will ask them that exact question. Do you believe it was right for Joseph Smith to take the wives of other men? And they will tilt their head and become a 12-year-old. Now, these are educated men, Harvard and MIT, who are now teaching at BYU. They will tilt their head and they go, well, I wasn't really there, and that's not my judgment call. Because they have translated my simple question, what do you think about the character of Joseph Smith, into, will you leave your business, your family, your career, your entire life for the respect of this doctrine? And obviously the answer is no. So no, Mormonism will never go away. There will always be a collection of die-hard relatives of Joseph Smith, relatives of Brigham Young, relatives of John Taylor, those who, like Mitt Romney, let's use some of the famous Mormon people who, in my opinion, who I have sent correspondences to, who know Mormonism is a lie. You know, the Osmond family is a good example. Now that Marie Osmond is old enough and wise enough, and Elizabeth Smart is a great example too. People who have been held up in the past by the Mormon Church as the example of Mormonism. And, you know, they're older now, wiser now. They know that it's okay to have your own opinion. They're kind of backing away from the classic Mormon story and saying, well, Joseph was an imperfect person and Mormonism is imperfect. Well, in my generation, there was no talk like that. So I know that's a long answer, but it's absolutely true in that Mormonism will never go away, because it isn't Mormonism as a church, it's Mormonism as a lifestyle. And that's where a lot of people fail to connect the dots and say, well, look, they're not being honest about their church. Well, give them a break, give them a little grace, because they're actually being asked to leave a lot more than just a church.
You touched a little bit on the reasons for leaving the church, but do you remember a specific moment where you began to think this isn't right?
Yes, I do. One of the last positions in the Mormon Church that Kathy and I actually had the privilege of fulfilling, and again, if anyone knows anything about us, we do not despise the Mormon people. The Mormon Church is quite different than the Mormon people. We love the Mormon people, and when people hear us and believe that we are railing against the Mormon people, we do not. We rail against the Mormon doctrine, the Mormon leadership. And it would make sense to most people, because I've never met a person who said, oh, I got a Mormon who lives next to me and I just hate it. Well, no. The vast majority of Mormon people are kind, they're honest, they're trustworthy, they're socially conscious about their neighborhoods, about their, the issues, they're helpful. They're great people, and they really are. And there's a reason why they are, because of that connection with the family and with the values of America. It's a uniquely participating kind of organization, but let me describe where it falls apart. So one of the last jobs, you might say, in the Mormon Church that Derek and I had, we were young single adult leaders. Now, a Mormon audience will know exactly what that is, but I'll describe that for other people. Within the Mormon Church, as within other churches, there's a collection of people that sometimes don't fit in the mainstream organization because they're not married or because they're on their own and they're single. The Mormon Church is uniquely focused on the family. So if you are a single mom or you don't have part of a family or you're separated from that, in the Mormon Church, as within another organization that is centered specifically for families, you might feel out of place. The Mormon Church has taken care of that group by making that group kind of autonomous and uniquely focused together. So the young single adults in the Mormon Church is a collection of men and women from 18 to 30 who are unmarried. So that collection of 18 to 30 meet together, pray together, study together, worship together, have parties together, participate together, and a mature couple is kind of their surrogate mother and father, both in the church and even outside the church, as far as activities and fun, and Kathy and I were that. Now, earlier on I described the different boundaries within the Mormon Church. There is some flexibility with this group. The young single adults, 18 to 30, unmarried, can come from various organizations, various congregations, wards, or stakes to meet together. And Kathy and I in the Washington, D.C. area were in charge of just such a group. And because of our past service in the Mormon Church, we were asked, set apart, and called to manage that group, because I was a bishop and because Kathy was in all the women leadership positions, the young women, the Relief Society organizations. We had, if you might call it, a suitable resume of knowledge within the Mormon structure, within the Mormon Church, to kind of be the mother and father of this group. Because this group came from different organizations across the Mormon landscape in Washington, between Washington and Baltimore. At the highest, we had 60, a group of 60 men and women, to include missionaries, active missionaries, young men and women who were preparing to go on a mission, and young men and women who have returned from the Mormon mission. So it was a really diverse collection of men and women, 18 to 30, unmarried, who became part of our organization. And this is within the church. This isn't Lee and Kathy organizing their own group. This is a formal grouping within the Mormon Church. It's unique, but it's formalized, and there's one of these in every area of Mormonism, a young single adult group. Well, these kids were awesome. I mean, they were just young Americans, young foreigners. They could be from anywhere. We had people who had work visas in the United States, who maybe were a nanny from a different country that was part of that group, single, 18 to 30, and they would all come together. So imagine at its height, 60 of these kids, and we would meet on Sundays, we would meet on Saturdays for parties and activities, and we would meet on Mondays for family home evening, where we would gather together and have lessons, and individually they would seek our advice and counsel on marriage, on finances, on careers, on family issues, and we were the mom and dad at an extended range for these kids, and it really was awesome to get to know these people. And because we felt secure and comfortable in Mormonism and that we were correct, we gave them the opportunity to invite other people, invite investigators, invite non-members. So this would be an opportunity if they had a friend in school or at work that was a non-member and they didn't really know how to tell the Mormon story. Come, bring them to our house, bring them to our parties and our meetings and in church, and we would help them do that as if we were one big family. Really got along great with them. Now, I reported directly to the stake president or the stake presidency because I was pulling kids from different wards. I worked kind of for all the bishops, and because I was a bishop, I understood the structure of the church. And I reported to the next level above that, which was the stake organization. Well, in one of these meetings, Dennis, that we had at our house, every week we would meet and have lessons about all kinds of different things. But once a month, because we chose to, we would have an open forum and let the kids, the youth, the young adults actually, bring any subject to the table. And it did not have to be religious. It could be anything, because they had challenges in life, so we wanted to support them in any way we could. Well, one evening, a young Mormon man brought a friend, and that friend was a Christian, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was actually witnessing his version of Christianity to the Mormon group through me by asking me questions, and I thought that was a great thing to do. was never shy of the tough question. And the young man asked, he said, "Hey, Bishop Baker, I read that Joseph Smith once boasted that he has done more to keep the church together than Peter, James, Paul, or even Christ." And that was a shocking and very offensive boast, if it was true, that Joseph Smith made. And I questioned where he got that information. And he said, "I read it in a Mormon manual." And I said, "Well, I have never heard that, and I will research that, but I'm sure that there must be a backstory, that it was probably taken out of context, and I would like to research that more." But to kind of get over the hump and the embarrassment of that evening, I said, "I'm okay with that, because I believe Joseph Smith would have said that in such a fashion or context that it would not be offensive to the church or to Christ." And the general group was kind of glad that I had made some kind of statement, and we moved on to another subject. So I kind of I diffused that by lying about my feelings if Joseph Smith really said that. So the next week, I went to the Mormon library at our church, and I took the reference that this young man gave, looked it up in the history of the church, found the volume, found the page, found the statement, and sure enough, Joseph Smith, very boldly, brashly, because he was being interviewed by a newspaper reporter, he claimed that he had done more than anyone in the church to keep the church together, to include Peter, James, and Paul, or Jesus Christ. He said, "I've done more than all of them." And now I was kind of taken back by that. Of course, the question had been resolved for that evening, but I was now interested in, why would Joseph Smith do that, and how come I've never heard that before, and where did this kid get that information? Because it's obviously accurate, because he knew that it was in a Mormon history document. So I took that to my leader, had an interview. We have monthly interviews. Hey, how are the young kids doing? And Kathy and I would report to them. And I brought that question up to my leadership, and this is where it started to fall apart for Lee and Kathy Baker. Former Mormon bishop, 32 years in the Mormon Church, extremely active. In fact, one of when I had this interview, this monthly interview with this man, Lauren Lund, one of his kids were actually in my group. So we were well accepted and woven into the fabric of their family as well. And he told me, don't ask questions like that. Don't let your kids ask questions like that. You need to be more in control of the environment. Well, now I was offended that there might be some information out there about Mormonism, or that there is something that I shouldn't be looking at or reading as an adult. And I said, well, I pressed him a little bit, and I said, well, if it's true, why can't I know about this information in the context it was given? He said, no, absolutely not. It's anti-Mormon information. Get back in control of your group. Your group was obviously running you rather than you running them. And that began my search onto what would be called classic anti-Mormon information, which turned out to be true Mormon doctrine or Mormon history that was uncomplimentary to the Mormon stories, but absolutely true. So that began the fall of Lee and Kathy Baker out of Mormonism from Mormon information, not anti-Mormon, just Mormon information. And that has been one of our kind of pillars of our research, is to educate Mormons or anyone that the information, like I told you back in the 70s, which was called anti-Mormon information, is actually just Mormon information, Mormon history, Mormon doctrine, Mormon theology that is not very complementary to the Mormon values. And that began the research of things like polygamy and polyandry and blood atonement and baptism for the dead. And why did the United States government issue 5 federal laws against the Mormons in the early 19th century? And so that began the fall of Mormonism out of us.
And Dennis, that began the fall. But what really clinched it for me was the last year that we were in the church, 2008, December 7th, 2008 is when we forced his own excommunication from the Mormon Church, and I'll let him explain that later. But what really hit me that year, that was the year that Warren Jeffs was arrested because he was taking 12-year-old girls and marrying them himself, and also marrying them off to men who were 56, 57 years old. And that's when it really hit me. In my lifetime, this was happening, and that's exactly what was happening when Joseph Smith first started teaching the members of the church about polygamy. So these polygamists, they're a break-off group now from Mormonism who continue this, the polygamy. But Joseph Smith started it. And so they're practicing today what Joseph Smith started, because they believe that it never should have gone away, because the only reason that the church stopped practicing polygamy was because of the laws that were given, that they were saying that you could, to be part of the United States, you can't practice polygamy, and they were not going to make Utah a state unless they conformed to not practicing polygamy. So that was huge for me when I saw Warren Jeffs on TV and them arresting him and talking about the story. Every night we'd get off work and I'd just come home and I would listen to the story and the updates, because that was happening in my lifetime, that men were marrying 12-year-old girls, just like Joseph Smith married girls as young as 14 in his lifetime. And so that it was a reality to me. That was huge. And then in one of the last classes that I attended at church in a Relief Society lesson, the Stake Relief Society president, so Lee explained to you earlier about a ward as a congregation and maybe 5 or 6 or 7 wards or a stake. She was over the Stake Relief Society, which is the women's group. She came and she taught a lesson to us. And that day I was sitting next to a woman I had never met before, but who was baptized a new member the day before. And so the Relief Society president came up to me and said, "Would you please sit by that sister over there? It's her first Sunday after being baptized yesterday." So I said, "Sure." Well, the Stake Relief Society president got up and she started talking immediately, and she sounded like she was in a drama, a play, that she is just, her expressions, and she was saying, "Sisters, can't you just wait until the day that you can become a goddess with your husband as a god by your side?" And she repeated it, "Can't you just wait until you can become a goddess with your husband as the god of your own world?" And I had known that throughout Mormonism, but it was the first time I had officially, in 50 years, had a lesson at church on becoming a goddess and my husband becoming a god. And she went on to say, all you have to do is, and listed off a list of works, all you have to do is pay your tithing, attend your meeting, pay your fast offering, your husband has to hold the priesthood, go to the temple. And so that just really floored me. So afterwards, I came out and I told Lee, I said, "I just can't believe I never thought about it like this." And then I went and told my mother, who was Mormon still. She lived about 20, 30 minutes from our house, so we drove down to her house. And I said, "Mom, I just can't believe that." I said, "I believe in one God of the universe, or of creation." And she said, "Oh, Kathy," she said, "it's like this." She said, "You and Lee will be the god and goddess of your world. Your dad and I will be the god and goddess of our world, and so on." I said, "But Mom, I believe in one God of creation." And so that's where I really was able to separate that, wow, this is not what I believed all these years. I don't believe that I can become a goddess and that Lee can become a god, because the Bible clearly teaches that there is one God, and God says he's a jealous God and that there should be no other gods. But yet Mormonism teaches that they're restoring, that you can become a god and goddess of your own world. So the polygamy issue and the becoming a god, those were what really, the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
Yeah. Lee, did you ever talk to that young man who posed that question to you, that kind of threw a rock on your railroad tracks and knocked the whole 30 plus years of being a Mormon bishop off track? Did you ever? I wonder if he knows how impactful that one small question was.
No, I never did. I have reached out to the young man who brought him, to the Mormon who kind of sponsored him, and I think he has left Mormonism, but I have never. I didn't even. I probably knew his name that night, but I wish. I use him as an example for Christians or people who find the integrity and the boldness to stand up, because that took quite a bit to kind of poke at a former Mormon bishop who was leading a group of 60 people, and I use that as an example as stand up and do what you feel is right, even if you don't get an immediate reaction in the environment or the event or the audience that you're in. You may walk home thinking, "Wow, that didn't do anything," but kind of like what you're doing, you can set a seed in someone's heart to question. And I believe that now, even as a Christian. I find it scary when I meet Christians who don't ask questions about Christianity. I now believe that you should question all authority, question everything you believe or heard or read about. Not take anything on face value. This is an amazing time that we live in. The cornucopia of opportunities to research should not scare anyone. That's why I support your work. I support any knowledge about anything. I want to know everything about everything that I can, even if it upsets my apple cart or, like you say, takes my train off the track. If that train's heading in the wrong direction, let's find reality and truth wherever it leads us. And that's what's crazy about Mormonism. Mormonism will say the right things, like we seek after truth. They will say the right things, but in practice they say, yeah, but not that truth, and not that version, and not this information. And that happens all the time with Christians. In what they believe and what they know can get shattered or shaken because they don't have the foundation of just real good, accurate research, knowledge. That shouldn't shake anybody on any subject.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Faith in Humanity podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss part 2 of this 2-part series. Part 2 is even better than part 1, if you can believe it. In part 2, we discuss Lee and Kathy's forced excommunication from the Mormon Church, and I also asked them what I think are some pretty challenging questions about Christianity, Mormonism, and about their beliefs now, so you definitely don't want to miss that. Be sure to like us on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook at the Faith in Humanity Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube under the same name, the Faith in Humanity Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at TFIH_podcast. And you can also email us at tfih.podcast@gmail.com. And lastly, if you have just a few seconds of your time to go on to iTunes, Google, or Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, and just give us a good rating, that'd be fantastic. All right, until next time, stay safe and peace be with you.